Thank you. It's great to be here. Thank you for the invitation and for the time. So, as was mentioned, my name is Husayn Kassai. I'm one of the co-founders and also the CEO of Onfido Background Checks. Onfido is a data-driven platform that helps build trust into the sharing economy by providing automated identity, criminal, financial, and other checks. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the sharing economy, it's this new business model whereby if you have a spare asset, such as a car seat in a car or a spare room in a house that you want to share with others through platforms like One Fine Stay or Airbnb or others, you're able to do so. It can also be for on-demand services. If you want to book a cleaner, a nanny, a tutor, a babysitter, or anything else, you're able to do so on demand. And the biggest or most famous example is Uber, for instance. Now, I am going to spend the next 20 minutes or so sharing how I started the company with my other two co-founders, how it all came about, and most importantly, the key lessons that we learned. I had the good fortune of being part of the Oxford Entrepreneurial Society 3 or 4 years ago. And at the time, I invited many speakers, and I would always ask, if possible, for them to share specifically the mistakes they made and what lessons they'd learned, just because I personally found them most useful. So that's my intention, and that's what I'll go through. And I believe we also have 20 minutes or so for questions afterwards. So I want to start with this. This is the first advert that I had for the first company that I sort of started that has now turned into Onfido Background Checks. It was called Reference Box. This was at the end of my first year, during the summer break. I printed 2,000 of these copies, and I went around, I cycled around the university, putting these into pigeonholes of different students. And it was a simple concept whereby you can collect the references from tutors or others, and then you can take a gap year or two, and then whenever you're ready to send it to an employer, Onfido, or at the time Reference Box, would just forward it on your behalf. The aim of it was to, I suppose, when you give your CV by itself, background checks, I recognize, was a bit of a difficult thing for employers to do. So this sort of, from the applicant perspective, created that bundle for you in order for you to forward it. But it didn't work out. And it came as a bit of a surprise to me, because after cycling around the university, putting these in the pigeonholes, that night I couldn't sleep very well. I was I was almost certain that in the morning there would be the security services, the media, everyone knocking on my door saying you've crashed all the university systems because everyone from Google down is using your software. That didn't happen. It took, you'd be surprised to hear maybe, but it took a few weeks because I guess in my mind I thought, who wouldn't want to effortlessly request their reference from a tutor or store them on an encrypted system and so on. After a few weeks, to cut a long story short, I discovered that there were only two users. One had provided fake details, and the other one was me. So I could see there probably wasn't too much of a future into the concept. But that's the first major mistake that I made. I just assumed, without necessarily speaking to anyone, that this was just such a blowout, amazing concept that if only people were given the opportunity to understand what it does, it would just take over the whole university and beyond. And it didn't. But looking back, I most definitely believe I would have done the same. Because for me, in many ways, entrepreneurship is an exercise whereby you only learn by doing, firstly. And it's quite important to start something. Doesn't matter what it is or where it is or when it is. But you're only able to learn as long as you start. In many ways, it's like walking or riding a bike. And although Reference Box doesn't exist in a sort of the form you see here, it was a great experience because it actually helped me understand that it's not necessarily what I think the customer needs, but it's most important to speak with the customers and understand what it is specifically that they need. Which brings me on to persistence. So almost all the entrepreneurship stories that I've read or heard demonstrate persistence. And it's not easy, the whole entrepreneurship. I know at times it's romanticized and everyone thinks, they're in the garage one day and the next day they suddenly sort of make it big. In my view, it's anything but. You tend to get very many no's. Almost always you're broke for the large proportion. It's sort of like a hockey stick. For a long period of time, nothing much happens, and then suddenly, if you're lucky and if it's the right timing for what you're trying to do, you may sort of grow. But persistence is important because in many ways, you have to give the chance for your concept, market, for your proposition to be tested by the market to see whether there's scope or fit for it or not. And I was persistent with Reference Box. It took me a whole year before I eventually discovered, after my first conversation with an employer, saying, you know, should students actually buy into this? Would you use it? It was only then I realized that no, the end user is the employer, and employers only want up-to-date references, and references specifically written for them. So once I discovered that, I realized it's a bit of a time, a long time wasted, because whereas persistence and hard work is important, I suppose I had this assumption that as long as you're persistent and hardworking, you're going to succeed. And that is an assumption I think many people hold, that as long as you work hard and as long as you're persistent, you'll succeed. And now I've come to realize that it's not necessarily the truth. Because persistence is important, but you also need to have something else. You need to be flexible. The term they use, I suppose, in Silicon Valley or the lean method is be able to pivot. So I soon discovered, not soon, actually after a year, far longer than I should have, that employers weren't interested in the original value proposition of automating the reference checking process, and that they wanted something that was completely different. So whereas it is important to be persistent, you also need to be flexible and pivot on whatever your idea is in order for you to find the value proposition that actually sticks to the market. So the way that came about was after the Reference Box experience, I, again, became interested in background checks as a whole, and I went through sort of the being background checked myself. It was a cumbersome, paper-based, long manual process, and I felt this sort of sector or industry is screaming out for technology and a better way of doing it, which is what I experienced, and so did my co-founders. But it's only through being flexible that we were able to eventually work out a way to see this is the unique value proposition for this unique need based on what the customers require and not on a hunch by itself. And it's the same story that you'd find elsewhere, be it, again, it's most startups or companies that have succeeded tend to do something now that is completely different to where they started out, be it LinkedIn or a whole host of others. And all of these have demonstrated that they are persistent and flexible. So once I landed on getting a better understanding of what it was that customers wanted and what potential employers or others needed, I then saw that why would I be best placed to serve that need? So if you look at it, I was sort of quite young. This is 3 or so years ago. At the time I looked 15. And they probably wouldn't take me seriously regardless, and sort of had no sector experience, no real capital as such, nothing really. And it's another thing that I soon saw in successful entrepreneurship stories was that they came with confidence. And I wanted to see how could you legitimately justify that confidence. And that sort of happens, that process happens as soon as you become more You learn more about incumbents and existing providers and their weaknesses. So the one strategic term for this is a sumo strategy. So sumo wrestlers in Japan, they use their opponent's weight to their own advantage. So that is a way whereby if you are able to intimately understand what a competing provider is offering into the marketplace, then you are quite well placed once you see their limitations on how your value proposition can be unique. And that's when you start to look at your strengths, right? So there are numerous examples, but one thing is, if there's an incumbent that charges, say, $100 or £100 for a service, then they are weak because they're not able to cut their price by 30, 40, 50%, because that's half their revenue gone, and therefore they probably wouldn't be able to exist. Whereas as a new startup, you can start at any price point you'd need to or you'd want to, because you can just have your costing structured accordingly. Or when you are an incumbent, especially in the software sort of markets, then you're in many ways you have to work within the constraints of your perhaps entrenched code or systems and other things, where things just the way a sumo wrestler, their weight is used against them, as long as you understand your competitors' weaknesses, there's good reason to be both happy and confident and hopeful that your unique value proposition is able to offer something that is suitable for this day and age and not something that your competitors may have been suited for 10, 20 years ago. And it's this continuous cycle of how innovative and new startups and companies are able to disrupt older ones who are no longer able to cater to customers or new customer needs or new customers as a whole. So if you look at your starting point, whereby, again, I found good reason to be confident because I could see that these clients would purchase or pay for the solution that we had in mind as co-founders, then you have to be very resourceful and very good at using every single small strength or advantage that you have to the best of your abilities. And we didn't have much to begin with, but we were good, I suppose, at being resourceful and using and leveraging the resources or assets that we had, be it relationships, networks, whatever else it was at the time. And we learned those skills as a result of being part of student societies, Oxford Entrepreneurs being one of the main ones, where, again, in a similar story, we, myself and at the time the Vice President of Oxford Entrepreneurs, Eamon, we saw that we wanted to get sort of high-profile speakers coming here and sort of speaking to our membership. And we got good at saying, come and speak at the famous Saïd Business School or this terrific old university. Or we worked at getting good at using what little we had to make a proposition attractive and appealing. And we just deployed the same tactics as we did at the Student Society and as we had seen others had done when they started their own companies. So this was the Saïd Business School seed fund investment we received almost 18 months, if not probably around 2 years ago. And it was a small amount. It was £20,000 to begin with. Prior to this, we had investment from ISIS Innovation as well. And this was sort of a key moment for us because I knew at the time that this investment would, in many ways, could be leveraged significantly to attract more investments. And it was within a matter of weeks after this that this signal was strong enough for other investors to come and invest in order for us to be able to get a lot more effective at what we wanted to do. And it's not just be it using a big brand like a business school, but it's using any means that are at your disposal to be able to test out a proposition with customers. Again, a lot of the speakers or a lot of the companies that we'd invited to speak as part of Oxford Entrepreneurial Society, we were able to contact and sort of ask, be it favors or for their genuine feedback. Now, past starting the company and being capitalized enough to be able to grow and have your minimum viable product and start to sell that, then you start to face completely new challenges. And that becomes sort of the scalability issue. Whereas it's quite easy as 3, 4, maybe even 5 members being able to structure yourself and sell and coordinate, and everyone is there to manage themselves. After the 7th, 8th, 9th employee or team member, it becomes significantly more challenging. And I suppose we quite early on, I say we, it's probably my co-founder far more than me, recognize that the people we have on the team is terrifically important. And right now, in my view, as to whether an idea is important or your investors or how capitalized you are, your experience, all these other things, for me, it's most important of all is your team. Because I strongly hold the view that the team that Onfido has right now, if we were to sell water or something, anything else, we would potentially do quite well in that. And it's all about who do you want on the bus. So my co-founder is really terrific at sort of being both selective and very, very clear about what it is that we want as part of the company. And the people you want to start out with, I suppose, are co-founders, to work closely with them and understand that it's your complementary skills that are the most important and that you're able to have a very good working relationship with them to begin with. And then secondly, is once you get past a few team members, is how you have a systematized way of adding individuals to your team. So we decided that the 3 core things we wanted to see, where possible, individuals on our team. The first one was to be inquisitive. And that is, in many ways, an entrepreneurial thing regardless. So always, for an individual, as part of a team member, to look at how you would improve things and how, essentially, you could continuously look at making things better and never settling. That was one thing. Second, we wanted ambitious individuals who would always be there, driven and working hard, and see that they're part of a bigger team, and they'd always want the team to succeed. And third is to be collaborative. So we wanted, I guess, as young members of the team, so we're now 32. Up until the 24th individual we had on the team, no one else had any experience in the background checking industry. So the first 24 individuals that we had were mostly either graduates or others who had no experience of the background checking industry whatsoever. And that wasn't necessarily intentional to begin with, but it's turned out to be quite an advantage. Because as young members joining an organization, you have both advantages and disadvantages. The disadvantage is that you have no experience, which means you'd probably have to spend some time discovering how a process should be put in place or achieved. Whereas if you have experience, then it's quite easy. You can just do what you used to do wherever you sort of worked at previously. But we were innovating, we produced this innovative solution, and we were looking to disrupt the sector and a whole industry. You're not necessarily able to do so if you have people who join a team who are of an old way of thinking about processes. And that, in hindsight, has turned out to be quite a good thing to do. So hiring individuals or team members who you're very clear about what you need as part of a team, and also how you'd want to get them on board so that their values are aligned to yours, and in terms of always looking for new ways of doing things. So once you have the individuals on the team, then it becomes about the culture and how culture matters, because most of the people we have on the team have job offers and very successful sort of opportunities elsewhere. And most of them come over with a significant pay cut, and yet they love it and they stay. And in order to do so, the hierarchy has to be, in many ways, depends on the sort of startup that you have, but for most young companies, it has to be mostly a flat hierarchy, whereas everyone genuinely has ownership on the area that they're specialized in and feels valued and feels needed and is able to make a significant impact. Not just told that we really value you, because people nowadays are far too smart to sort of see past that, but genuinely feel needed. And that is something we've had from the first day, not through choice again, just because, again, we're all young. We don't know, I can't say we don't know what we're doing, but in a different, I guess that's not far from the truth. In the specific sectors, yes, be it sales, marketing, this is all new for everyone. So that when you have the team, people on the bus who are all aligned to what you want to do, it's always around, this is a specific problem we need to address. You get the 5 or 10 people, however many, who have some sort of knowledge or expertise in that domain, or who are a stakeholder in that specific issue, into a room, and you say, this is a challenge, now let's get creative in how we can think of the best way to address this. And that has worked quite well in terms of what we do. So a culture can only really be built based off experience. And it's everyone in the team has to represent and have that culture as part of them. It's not something you can impose or enforce. And so when we got to thinking about how we would go about doing this, especially as the team started to get big and we had new joiners coming on board all the time, we, mostly through reading and learning from others, as we always do, we thought that this is sort of the best thing that, of our reading, came out of structuring the team. So focusing on what we're best at, which is for us as a software company, is building technology to help our customers make fast and informed decisions on essentially who they can trust. Secondly is making the economics work so that customers would actually pay for this and it would be a way of paying the bills. And thirdly, for us to be passionate about what we're doing, because there are increasingly, for us, this whole sharing economy is a wonderful model, but people don't always feel comfortable trusting perfect strangers. And wouldn't it be great if they could have that instant trust built wherever possible in order for them to achieve that? And having values and sort of plans and a vision for where you're headed always helps, firstly, with getting those individuals onto your team to begin with, and secondly, to ensure everyone is sort of headed in the same direction. Now, I know there's only probably a couple of minutes left, but something terrific that we incorporated almost 6 months ago was there is no way anyone can realistically manage a team of 10 plus or even 5 plus, right? Because if you're spending just half an hour, 20 minutes every day deciding on whether this member of the team, what did you do yesterday, what do you need to do today, and so on, it just becomes quite close to impossible. So you need to, and this is something we've seen in most startups, you need to have a system in place whereby there is no need, especially if you're a flat hierarchy, for anyone to manage anyone else. But you'd want to have a structure in place for everyone to be able to manage themselves. And the best system that we saw that achieved this was called OKRs, Objectives and Key Results. So Google used this, Intel used this, a whole host of startups, or just generally software companies, and others use this methodology, whereby you have, be it a quarterly or a monthly session with all team members, and they tell you what they think they are best able to contribute towards. And then that is how they're able to assess their own success and push themselves as much as possible. And we've written articles and everything else on this whole approach, and it's sort of, in many ways, helps once you sort of get to quite a large number. The second thing that becomes an issue, or that lessons that we've learned once you start scaling, is that we found that other companies that tended to sort of grow quite well but then not do as well is because they tend to get further away from the customers. And so in the early days, companies, most of them, had a good sense of what the customer needs were and addressed those effectively. But as they grew, there became an increasing sort of gap between executives or decision makers or those who set the strategy and the customer voice. And as that gap gets bigger, then you're becoming further detached from what the actual need and the real problem is, and therefore you become just a running brand that is running on a sort of timeline that is going to end soon as the next competitor comes along. So we make it a priority for always, if it's something positive or negative, to come straight to a co-founder if there's a client who wants something improved or has a complaint of any nature. And that way we can make sure that they see themselves that it's of the utmost of the importance, just because it's still very early days in our sort of trajectory, and we would never, ever want to be in a position where the client isn't the number one focus and the number one priority. And even if you look at Google or any other company that has continued to grow well, despite their scale, they always take complaints and suggestions very, very seriously. And there are other approaches. So you have essentially at a certain level, you have business development managers and others who come on board, who their job becomes essentially continuing to connect what the customers say with what the executives or the co-founders or whoever the decision makers are about what needs to be done and where the direction needs to be headed. So just to summarize, and I know I've covered quite a bit, I suppose, in terms of what entrepreneurship is more broadly, Mark Ventresca does a great job of defining it as system builders. And what I take that to mean, in many ways, is for someone who, or if you look at an entrepreneurial co-founder set, to have two parts to that. One is they can see a unique value proposition in doing something and addressing a real customer need. And the second part of that is sort of executing that and delivering it. So to, I suppose, recap some of the key lessons that I'd learned through mistakes. One was, again, ensuring that I'm solving a genuine problem, unlike Reference Box was to begin with, to ensure that there's both persistence and flexibility so that the proposition is suitable for the right need. Understanding that both confidence is important and the fact that you need to be lean. You need to be lean in the early days especially, so that you're able to last as long as necessary to be able to prove that you're addressing a real need. And on execution and delivery, starting early is important. Given your limited resources in the early days, being quite resourceful and leveraging relationships and other assets, it's getting the best team you can possibly do and devoting as much resources as you need to. You'd read, and I'm sure you've heard the stories of however large companies become, the successful ones tend to have recruitment as the number one priority, so that even if there are 5,000 individuals on the team, it's usually the CEO or someone very senior who onboards or just essentially has a final sign-off on everyone who joins the team, is to build a culture where everyone absolutely loves what they do and they give it their all, and have a systematized way for ensuring no one needs to be managed, because that's not really both scalable or effective, but that the individuals themselves know what they want to do and are given the tools and means by which to do so. And I'll probably run out of time, but there's sort of 2 points to talk about investments in angels as a whole. One very quick one is always be quite clear about those who are claiming to want to help, but aren't necessarily looking to do so. So be selective, and be it angels or others who you speak with, and look to build relationships with those investors who are able to add the most strategic value. And that has been just one of the best things that we've ever done in terms of getting the advice and all the sort of great things that come with it. As for the first year that I spent in my university, sort of making Reference Box a huge failure, there was no need for me to do so if I'd only read these books about the lean method and everything else. Entrepreneurship is very much a scientific approach where you can have a very systematic way of assessing whether A, you're on the right lines on the right value proposition, and B, knowing when to cut your losses and move on to something else. So you can significantly accelerate that process as long as you have a scientific approach in doing so. And yeah, I hope that's been useful, and the best of luck in your ventures.
Anyone have any questions for Saïd?
Hi, thank you so much for the talk. It was really insightful. You mentioned that you'd taken lessons from being part of the Student Society at Oxford. I wonder if you feel that you also benefited from the academic side, and if that's helped you and your business going forward, is having that professional management training from a renowned business school.
Correct. Good question. So I studied economics and management. Half of my course was at the business school. I don't know, if, just thinking through all my friends who have companies, whether it is necessary for you to have studied anything to do with management. So I'm not sure, I can't fairly say that it hasn't helped. It most definitely has. But knowing my friends who haven't necessarily come from a discipline regarding management, I know that it's relatively easy for you to read up on an area that you don't know, or if you're resourceful, you just go and find an expert in that area who's able to help. There is those books that I shared with you, none of them came from the management studies, and as far as an entrepreneurship course is concerned, they are the ones that are most useful, which came outside of the course anyway. But back to, so academic side I think has helped, but I'm not sure if it would have made a significant difference if I had studied something else. As for more valuable than that is if you consider the student societies and events I was sort of involved with. That was in many ways, Eamon and I sort of saw Oxford Entrepreneurs as our first company because we had sponsors and sort of customers looking at like membership and everything else. And you get quite good in, I suppose, learning how to see how to effectively have a plan of making things happen. So we had a committee, a large one, 30, 32 at the time. And as students, everyone's busy, no one wants to sort of do anything. So we had to get very good and very creative because, again, we couldn't pay salaries to anyone, about how to delegate something very specific, so make someone really accountable for what needs to happen, and then to assess whether they do it or not. And the way we managed that was we'd only ever give a task to one person once. So if that happened, it was great, and they'd get more tasks for the future rounds. If it didn't, it was sort of one of us would have to pick that up, but then we'd never ask that person to do that again. And then from, I suppose, the 30 to 32 that we had, at the end there were 5 or 6 who were real doers. And they're the main ones who are either part of Onfido or I'm hoping I'll be able to persuade to come join soon. You get very good at understanding how to get people to sort of be on board with what you're looking to achieve in order for them to want to do it themselves and not do it as a result of them feeling they have to in many ways.
Any other questions?
Hi, Husayn. Thanks for the chat. Very interesting. I have a question about putting together a team. You talked about you need to keep them motivated, keep them interested, and you also mentioned that some of the members who joined actually took a cut, pay cut, etc. I know money is not everything, but it is a big motivation for people who may not know you personally and join a company. I'm wondering, can you share some thoughts on how you keep the team motivated, particularly the ones who have joined Onfido as new employees and may not necessarily know the startup story?
Yes, so, I mean, first of all, if they don't know the Onfido story, then they're unlikely to be able to join. But, so, as examples, our sort of CTO, he joined and it was almost a 60% pay cut when he did. When you substitute that for equity, there's a big part to be said for doing so. A, because everyone has put in effort to make the company grow, and therefore everyone should be able to sort of reward in proportion from it. So everyone as part of the company, every single individual is a shareholder. So that's one big thing, and that's what you'll find almost with any startup, and especially software ones. I don't know if it's necessarily software ones, but most definitely with startups. So the ones I know have an employee share option pool where everyone sort of has shareholding in the company. As for people, you need to be selective on who you have on the team. So perhaps if you're looking for someone who wants to do something just because they love doing a good job of it, then they may not apply to begin with. So they have other options where they can earn a lot more. But if they want to be part of something that's far more than just the necessary salary, but they want to be part of something because they want to have a voice, and that voice is heard, to make a genuine impact and to be part of and see the results of their inputs on a daily basis, they're typically the individuals you want as part of your team to begin with. But there are sort of the core things that we do, back to your key question of how do you, I suppose, motivate. There are the core things, and then there are secondary things. So gym membership and telephone and laptops, and all companies offer those. And I suppose there's some sort of misunderstandings on thinking that as long as you offer these additional benefits, they substitute for a higher salary. They don't. They're good to have, subsidized gym membership and everything else, but they're not the core essence of why startups are able to attract the best talent and yet more often than not pay the market wages you individuals get elsewhere. And it comes down to making individuals feel empowered and trusted that they're able to be a genuine decision maker. So as long as you're able to offer that and be honest about that, and ensure that everyone feels that is the case, then there's no reason why you wouldn't be able to get the most talented individuals from across the world joining your team.
Where are you on your journey now, and how's it going?
So it's good. I guess we get lost on a monthly basis because a lot's happening, and there is a detachment whereby a year ago, all of us were intimately involved with everything that's happening. Now we're much more specialized in different areas, so it's going quite well. We have basically increasingly started doing update sessions. So every morning we have a sales update scrum where everyone briefs everyone else. Every Tuesday morning, as a whole team, we have breakfast together, and that's the opportunity we have to share with everyone else what the key contracts are, what the key development points are, and it's everyone constantly feels engaged with everything else that's happening. So it's never you have that comfort of knowing it's a closely knit team, and you don't lose that despite how big you're sort of growing.
So thanks for the presentation. So you talked a bit about selecting the right angel investor or the VC firm. So what qualities do you look into those firms apart from the brand name and how big they are and their past performance?
So past performance and all those things are great, and they're like a big bonus, but I suppose it's mostly their approach. So if they come and they get the concept and they get the future and they get the vision, and they're able to sort of contribute and help from the outset, despite them investing or not, we found them to be the best. So when you have an angel investor who says, look, you guys are interesting, I want to invest, but regardless, these are my 3 or 4 things I think you guys should be doing, and these are my 3 or 4 contacts who are potential clients, let me introduce you to them anyway. They're the ones who we typically prefer to work with, because for whatever reason, they tend to be the best angels you sort of have. And as for looking at track record and other things, they're all great. I suppose if you had, it's in many ways like selecting a candidate. If you have 3 or 4 to pick from, and you only have don't have too much time to select, you go based on past performance. But you may be missing out on other things if you're not offering due course and due sort of consideration. So wherever possible, we have, be it an individual joining the team, we have a few days where they just come and get to know the team and vice versa before we actually make an offer. And angels too, we have a few sessions with like workshops to share ideas and say, this is our pricing policy, what do you think? This is this policy, what do you think? To see if we can have like that tutorial relationship And that's when we sort of make a final decision, when we're able to, which is sort of has been for the last 12 months. But in the early days, we weren't able to. It's sort of getting an angel investment is very tough. And you depends on where you present to, but you sometimes have these former hedge fund managers who are very risk averse, and so you sit across the table from them, you say, look, this is my presentation, I'm trying to grow a $1 billion company, please invest. And either they laugh or otherwise, they don't necessarily encourage big thinking, and where this just is sort of determined that this true belief that incumbents and entrenched systems in sort of the current way of things working will not continue, will be completely different in 5 or 10 years' time. As soon as you're able to find someone who gets that, you don't even have to say it twice, they're the ones who you really want to you want to persuade them to invest in you. Sure.
How do you test for a cultural fit in when hiring new people, whether it's new employees or new partners?
That is very tough. We've had a head of talent for about 7 months, which has just been one of the best decisions ever. In that so her name is Ellie, and she has a very good job of a very important job of essentially getting someone to, first of all, meet with as many team members as possible, and we're trying to work with them, but also asking some simple questions as, so what's an example of this and what's an example of that, to see whether there's a cultural fit. And naturally, you don't always necessarily get it right, but you have to understand its importance to be able to dedicate the right amount of time to it in order for you to have a better chance or a better likelihood of finding those who are a cultural fit who join. There are other sort of things you could naturally do. No one starts out on a permanent contract to begin with. There's always a 3-6 month period before they're offered one, and there are sort of more smaller practical things that you can do. But the real or most important take-home point is for you to recognize the importance of it, and therefore be able to allocate the resources at meeting with them and having at least a few days of getting to know them mutually before they're able to join.
And do you have codified culture already in some sort of posters, banners, or just informal?
I'm not so sure. No is the answer, because you walk into, which company do you not walk into that says trust, integrity, and a half, because they don't mean anything. In fact, if you probably have to write that you're the best, or you write that you have trust, or just we have integrity, then more likely you probably don't. Yeah, correct. So I don't think there's anywhere in our office that we write that anywhere, but we sort of, whoever interviews or whoever's as part of the onboarding experience, when they join, we go through everything, and it's sort of necessary for you to buy into that before you accept to join anyway. So that's, I suppose, how we ensure that it's maintained.
Time for one more short question.
How are you going to defend? I think you often say you want to help power the sharing economy.
Yeah.
You say you want to help power the sharing economy, and then dependent on what sharing economy company you're going to power, there's a different price point that they'd be willing to pay for a background check.
Correct.
How are you going to provide the full sort of range of background checks to be sort of relevant for each sharing economy company?
Good, very good question. There are, I suppose, one thing you could do is we have a system whereby you have different levels of different checks that you're able to sort of purchase or select based on both your risk profile and the timelines at which you're willing to sort of wait for them. That is the best way. The second one is, as and when the market's growing, and as soon as you have the key provider in each vertical, they set the standard, they anchor what is acceptable and what is sort of the right thing to the right level at which to be checking. So it just becomes a case of doing case studies on the key provider in each vertical and just communicating that to everyone else.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.